Good afternoon and welcome to today's event on Women at the Cutting Edge. I'm Lina, I'm a program manager here at Asia Society Australia, and I'm the curator of this year's Disruptive Asia edition on women and girls. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that many participants in today's event are dialing in from locations that have traditional owners and custodians. I'm currently on Gadigal land of the Aryan Nation, and I pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Today's event marks the publication of Disruptive Asia's first chapter on how women and girls are disrupting the economy and business. For those of you who don't know, Disruptive Asia is our annual publication, and Volume 5 sets out to examine how women and girls are changing the economic, social, political, and business dynamics across Asia, but also how they're being impacted by these changes themselves. So in the first chapter, we explored the power of parity, gearing the economy towards women, pandemic recovery, the lack of women on boards, and much more. So make sure to visit our website to read the first essays. Today's event, though, is on women at the cutting edge, and we'll be looking at the gender paradox of STEM. So our world faces a multitude of increasingly interlinked challenges. And here I'm thinking of climate change, of the global pandemic, of course, demographic changes, ramping inequalities, and the list goes on, unfortunately. And more technical know-how is becoming crucial to overcome these challenges. And yet, countries at the cutting edge of technologies often have serious labor and skill shortages in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which is what STEM stands for. And often these same countries are the ones with the lowest number of women in STEM. So for example, when we look at researchers, less than 30% of world's researchers are women. And if we look at Asia, this figure gets even worse, with women holding only 18.5% of research positions in South and West Asia, and 23.4% in East Asia. So increasing the number of women in STEM would not only bring us closer to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goal for gender equality, but it would also help us close the gap to achieve other SDGs, such as ending hunger or tackling climate change, for example. So today, we really want to try to understand why this gap exists and what we can do to reduce the barriers of having more women in STEM in the region. Before we do that, though, I just want to go through the usual housekeeping. We'll have a 40-minute panel discussion, and then we'll move on to Q&A. And make sure to submit your questions in the Q&A box at any time, and we'll do our best, hopefully, if we have time to cover all of them. I also, before we move on to the discussion, I also have a very special announcement. Asia Society Australia is proud to sponsor In Touch Inspire initiative through all of our Disruptive Asia Women and Girls events. In Touch is a multicultural center against family violence, and their Inspire initiative is a critical and unique program that provides support to women from migrant and refugee backgrounds who are recovering from family violence. So as most of you know, I'm sure, the pandemic has increased the number of domestic violence cases dramatically. And we really want to do more than just talk about it or write about it. The team at Inspire focuses on what happens next. So how we can support these women to build the life that they choose, to connect with others, and also to gain financial independence. So you can find more about this initiative by clicking on the link in the chat box or by scanning the QR code that we're sharing with you now. And we really encourage our event participants to donate to this incredible program. If you do, and if you can, please use the code Asia Society Australia DA in the comment box when you donate. So, all right, that's enough for me. I will now introduce our great panel and introduce today's speakers. So first up, we have Liyana Fauzi, who is the lead product manager at GovTech in Singapore. She's been involved in government tech initiatives such as data.gov.sg and Singapore's Digital Government Blueprint. She also volunteers at the Cadet Project, which is an initiative to enable more minority and Muslim women gain success in technology. And she'll speak about that a little bit more in today's discussion. Jung Sun Kim is the Executive Vice President of Dongseo University. She is a professor at the Department of Biomedical Laboratory Science, and she is also the president of the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists. And then last but not least, we have Kylie Walker, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering, where she works with expert fellows to lead crucial national conversations and strategy towards a thriving, healthy, and connected Australia supported by technology. And in 2019, she was on the AFT's 100 Women of Influence list for her work on improving equality, diversity, and inclusion in STEM. So I really recommend that you click on the link in the chat box to read their full bios, because I don't have time to go over all the amazing things that these women are doing. But anyway, it's a real pleasure to have you here, and we have a lot to cover. I took enough of everybody's time, so let's jump right in. First, I want to cover kind of the state of play in the region, look at what's the deal for women in STEM in the region and how we got there. Jung Sun, let me start with you. Pulling from your work at the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists, but also your own policy research on women in STEM, could you tell us a little bit about the current state of play in the region for women in STEM? And do you see any best or worst performing countries?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Lina and the Asia Society Australia for inviting me to speak today. As president of the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists, I can tell you that currently our APNN regional network is the most active compared to members from other continents of the world. APNN comprises of 16 member countries. 14 of them belong to the Asian continent, and we have Australia and New Zealand also as part of the APNN network. When I say active, this is a manifestation of the involvement of members themselves who are women engineers and scientists, but it also is quite noteworthy that the respective governments are showing much interest in the form of various supports. For example, in Korea, the Association of Korean Women Scientists and Engineers receive a significant amount of funding from the Korean Ministry of Science, Technology, and ICT. However, each country varies and differs in policies for women in STEM, although most, if not all, countries would agree on the need to improve the underrepresentation of women in STEM. This is because most Asian countries now acknowledge that gender equality is not only a matter of concern for women, but for everyone. What I find quite also interesting is that our APNN members tend to place more emphasis on the APNN networking than the global INWEST networking, meaning that more people tend to participate in the APNN related meetings compared to the global meetings. And this may have something to do with the emphasis of most of the Asian country governments on the need for a stronger Asian cooperation. As far as best and worst cases are concerned, I hesitate to answer this because the situation and culture would be different in every country. Moreover, we do not have an objective criterion that we can use for this comparison. The European Union, for example, has been publishing the SHE figures since 2003, and this report includes very objective and scientific ways to show how women in STEM are progressing in terms of actual numbers and figures. For Asia, we do not have such indicators yet, and I say yet because one thing that the APN of INWEST has been trying to establish over the years is a set of indicators that could be common to the APNN countries. So for now, until we have these established, we are using indicators like the Human Development Index published by the UNDP, the Gender Gap Index published by the World Economic Forum, for examples. And what is noteworthy that we can see here is that countries that rank higher in HDI do not necessarily show high-ranking GGI. And a very good example, in fact, is Korea. Korea ranks quite high in HDI, but we are very low in HDI. And there are other countries that show different patterns. So we would want countries to show, I think the ideal thing is that countries would show uh, high human development as well as gender gap index. But again, reality is that we are a little quite far away from reaching gender parity yet. Another point that I would like to also mention here is that gender equality does not necessarily relate to solving the underrepresentation of women in technology. And this is the term that you used, Lina, in the beginning, what we call the gender equality paradox. So I think I might have a little more time to talk about this towards the end. But what I believe that is most important at this point is to have, to establish common indices that would provide us more clear situation of the Asian countries in terms of how women in STEM are doing, so that we can see the situation better, as in the case of the European countries. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we'll come back to this, to the example of Korea, because it's a quite interesting case study. So it's great to see that we have some progress in recent years. And of course, every country and every culture is different. It's really hard to make these big regional generalizations. But I still want to ask you, Liyana, if you see any major challenges when it comes to the participation, but also the achievement and the progression of women and girls in STEM fields.
Thanks, Lina, and also thanks for having me in part of this panel discussion. I think there are many reasons, but I'll just try to cover a couple of my own observations. So recently, a study by a local university in Singapore actually shared that out of the girls and guys that actually take STEM-related courses in school, only 58% of the girls actually ended up in related roles compared to 75% of men, which is a very big difference. So I think this kind of begets the question as to, so it looks like there is some interest to go through a formal course in STEM, but why doesn't it translate into more girls and more women taking up STEM-related courses as their first career? I think in recent years, so I've been in the tech space for about 10 years now, and in recent years, there are many programs in place to support girls and women. And I wanted to touch a little bit more about the impact of stereotypes on choices and progress by these women. So there's this social role theory, which talks about how certain roles and for men and women, or even any other stereotypes, have been assigned based on like a general observation by people. And these are stereotypes that we don't even question today. But the one I wanted to touch more upon is about how women today are still seen as the main home carers if compared to men, even as many women hold full-time jobs today. So similarly, as I think many cultures see men as the breadwinner of the family, and with such stereotypes in place, there is a very big chance that a woman may differ or make her career choices based on family-related matters, or could even see a role in tech as being contradictory to having a successful family. So there are many stereotypes to overcome. And the reality is that women make career adjustments around childbirth and in anticipation of children, and men do not. And women still remain the dominant providers of household work and childcare, even when they have careers. So what I suppose we could do is then to look at the structural issues of women in the workplace. Clearly, there will be many existence of gender bias in organizational policies and practices that may suggest that women kind of have no power sometimes to determine their own success because these biases may be very kind of inbuilt. And also there's I think everyone in this room probably have heard the usual things about how there's this stereotype that men are louder and more firm and therefore more competent, which is not necessarily true. But this is an unconscious bias that has been proven to be quite prevalent even in today's society. So some things that we are looking at is that I think when you talk about looking for new hires, for example, in the organization, how do you make sure that you are able to give women a fair chance, given that indeed the supply of men and women in the tech sector is not proportionate. There's a very big balance. So given that, the possibility of hiring a man is much higher. So some examples on the ways in which we need to rethink about this is perhaps, I know some organizations are considering having a quota for like women that they hire. But the trouble with that is that it might be antithesis to meritocracy, which means that are you just hiring a set of women just because you need to fulfill this quota? Something that perhaps myself as a hiring manager, when I look out for roles, is perhaps maybe just to spend a little bit more time so that you can get so-called a group of candidates, both men and women with similar capabilities, even if it may take you a bit more time to find the woman that matches that kind of capabilities, and let the both of them go for an interview before deciding which one to hire. In this way, you're not giving up on meritocracy, you're still getting the best man or woman for the job. It's just that perhaps, just practically you might need to spend a little bit more time to find like women candidates that are suitable. So I think at the end of the day, it's really important to encourage inclusive policy making. The fact that, when I shared earlier about how women make their choices around family aspirations, both men and women should be kind of treating this as a family issue and a family trade-off rather than a women issue or a women's trade-off. There are some people that say that, in order to enable women to progress, for example, if she's been in the tech sector, she wants to continue on, get her PhD and whatnot, but because of family reasons, she may rethink it. But should we think about normalizing certain constructs, like perhaps, the husband taking a break to stay at home so that the wife can pursue what she wants to pursue? These are still not very well accepted into the society, and maybe we need to ask ourselves whether that's something that maybe we want to normalize. So I think at the end of the day, another challenge that women face is that they often feel isolated. For myself, when I started out 10 years ago, it wasn't something that we gave much thought to. We just, went along. I enjoyed tech as growing up, and so I decided to pursue it. But in my work with the Kodak project today, we do meet girls who tell us that they often feel isolated, being usually the only woman in the room or the only minority women in the room. And sometimes when the going gets tough, they want to give up. They want to give up and just go for an easier, what they call an easier career or a different path. Even though they've, for example, I met this one young lady who was doing a cybersecurity course. And she found it really challenging and she didn't know who to look to. I mean, these girls, they do have teachers and tutors, but they may not be comfortable. And I think we need to build this community to help out such young girls that want to make a path in their careers with tech. And more importantly, I think there's also this need to be able to enable more women to vision how they want to have a successful career with tech, and then build a community around that. And I think I can touch more about that when we talk more about some of the community kind of questions later on.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll talk about the importance of support groups and having networks later on. So you touched about the fact that even though there are women studying science and STEM skills, it doesn't always translate in career. And also it might be a little bit more difficult for women to pursue a PhD because of their family obligations. Kylie, when do you see women and girls' participation and interest in STEM drop? And why do women and girls continue to be underrepresented in tech sectors despite the known benefit of having gender equality and diversity?
Thanks, Lena, and it's lovely to be joining you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country here in Canberra, Australia's national capital. Look, everything that Liyana said and Jung Sun said, there are about 50 more things I could say about all of that. It's wonderful to be part of such a knowledgeable and articulate panel, so thank you. Women and girls' participation and interest in STEM, we know that the dropout points occur at every transition point throughout life. So from a very, very young age, as Liyana referenced, stereotypes are very, very important. So we socialise young boys to think of themselves as technical problem solvers. We socialise young girls to think of themselves as carers and in caring roles. So right from the beginning, before kids are even literate, before they're even articulate, we're teaching them to stereotype themselves into particular roles. So we're up against a barrier right from that toddlerdom on. But then there are significant dropout points for girls in STEM throughout education. At the end of primary school is a big one. We often find that girls who excel in maths and science where it's offered at primary school failing that in year 7 or dropping out in year 7, 8 as they enter secondary school. They're dropping out again at that crucial inflection point between the end of sort of year 10 and while they're entering those last 2 years years of secondary school and thinking about the courses that they want to take at university, another dropout point at the end of school and as they're entering university, and then further dropout points at the end of a bachelor degree and the end of advanced degrees. The final and the big departure for girls and women in STEM is in their mid-career, so when they hit their 30s. Now, part of that, and it's always been explained as that's the childbearing years, and that women leave from a culture that's often not very welcoming and inclusive of work-life balance and of caring duties, and then they find it hard to re-enter. Or if they're in research, they get left behind and that there's a gap in their research career that they find it very difficult to fill. Others have stepped in and taken over their research projects, and it's very hard to re-enter after that break. But it's not the only factor, because we know that actually that dropout occurs for women regardless of whether they have caring duties, regardless of whether they become parents. And so there's got to be a cultural and a structural element to it as well. In Australia, we're looking at around 8% of the senior engineering workforce is women. That's not very high. And if you're the only woman in the room, and you're often the only woman in the room, it requires a depth of resilience and a depth of self-belief that we don't ask of men in that career. And when you ask someone to show up every single day and bring that depth of resilience and that depth of self-belief, and to be responsible for educating the people around you about why diversity and inclusion is important, that takes its toll over time. And so we see people dropping out in that mid-career where they start to think, is this actually where I want to put all of my energy? Is it my job to educate all of my colleagues or to transform the culture of my organisation? That's part of why I believe, and I always say that gender equity, whether it's in STEM or anywhere else, gender equity is a people's issue. It's not a women's issue. And it's until men step up and take responsibility and joint leadership of gender equity initiatives and of culture change and of ensuring that flexibility applies to everybody in the workforce, and everybody is expected to take that flexibility and to spend time on parenting or caring for elderly relatives, for example. Until men take that leadership and do it boldly and proactively and loudly, I don't think we are going to achieve equality, either in terms of numbers and seniority or in terms of pay, because diversity is the start. You can hire a diverse workforce, absolutely, but inclusion is the key, because if you bring a diverse workforce into your workplace and you don't have the structures and the culture set up to support those people to thrive and to have the tools to excel in their role, they're not going to stick around. They're going to go and find something else to do. I guess the final thing I would say is, and obviously that's not just about gender, that's about diversity in all of its wonderful iterations. I guess the other thing that I would say is that it's due to us, to those in leadership, to recognise the privilege that we have, and therefore the duty that we have to speak out on these issues. I do take seriously my duty to educate the people around me. The fellowship of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering is 900 of Australia's leaders in applied science, technology and engineering. Most of them are men. Most of them are either at the top of their organisation or they're retired and they have been at the top of their organisation. These are actually the people who can make a difference. They can lead that culture change and role model that culture change. And so it's important, I think, for me to be here every day and asking them to do better alongside me. It's not enough to ask women to do that work on their own.
Absolutely. And you spoke about resilience, and it's funny. Well, it's not funny, it's quite sad, but we had another event earlier this year about something a bit unrelated on women, the potential of women in the pandemic recovery. And our panelist also spoke of resilience and courage just to be there, which, as you say, definitely takes its toll. So I want to move a little bit now to another topic, because you heard me say that there's a lot of benefits to gender equality in STEM. So now I want to dig a bit deeper and talk about those benefits. Liyana, back to you. You have a rich experience covering government tech initiatives. So what do you think is the role of technology on a country's competitiveness? And I guess what I'm trying to get at is why is it so important for a country to have a robust tech labor force?
Sure. And before I answer that question, I just want to say to Kyle, I really love how you talked about gender equity and not gender equality, because those are two very different things, and people often confuse them. And gender equity is certainly something we should work towards. So for this question on competitiveness, so in my past roles, in addition to data.gov.sg and the digital government blueprint for Singapore, I did work for Singapore on some areas such as the UN e-government survey. I think Jung Sun mentioned about it earlier today. And we also did this thing called the Smart City Index. So across all these indices, I mean, every year certain portions change, but the common kind of criteria that remains within all these indices is really about how people in the country have access to infrastructure and capability building opportunities. And at the same time, of course, whether there are opportunities for innovation within the country. So to me, I think a robust labor tech force can support the development of efforts, either in leading to greater profits from the commercial side, enabling the country to perform more efficiently or make better use of its resources. I was thinking through this question, and I think there are some examples that we can see here. So for example, in Singapore, we have been building tech has always been a big focus. If you hear sort of even the leaders of the country, tech is always the thing. Singapore being a smaller country, our manpower is very important. So for example, we have worked on things like the National Digital Identity Initiative. So it's a single ID that citizens can use when transacting online with both the public and private sectors. So with an ID like this, a lot of effort is spent into making sure that it's secure, that the process is smooth and convenient for all citizens. And with a secure and convenient service like this brings a lot of benefits for the country's competitiveness as a whole, because we're able to share this one so-called resource with the private sector as well. And this would not have come about if we hadn't had a pretty good tech labor workforce. So services that I think don't make a distinction between public and private sector means that the resources are used efficiently, there are productivity gains, there's some cost avoidance. So the country as a whole can sort of use this towards being more competitive. I think another thing is also that, we are living in an environment where rapid, disruptive and constant change is the new norm. COVID happened and you see how things move so fast. It caught everyone by surprise, right? We all thought it will stay here for a little bit and then we'll move on, but no, it's still here. So the country needs to be able to constantly unleash fresh energy and innovation. So having a robust tech force means that you are able to experiment early. Pivot early, and then sort of move towards gain smart sooner. And I think many of us, when we think about tech and we think about COVID and how tech helped COVID, for example, the working demo for Singapore's contact tracing application, Trace Together, it was developed over a weekend by a team of young software engineers. And they basically just spent a weekend thinking about the problem, rolling it out. And today it's a common thing. It's a common app that we use across the country for a while now. So I think when you have a robust tech force, there are many possibilities, of course, but for a country to remain competitive, it's not just about having a robust tech force. You will not gain the benefits if the people that you're serving are not able to use your products. So, even my work on the digital government blueprint, I think we had a line on making sure that everyone is digitally enabled. So this means that anyone that needs to use your service, whether it's an elderly, young children who have to, some primary school kids do have to use some form of technology. This means that you need to be able to design your services so that they're seamless and they can be adopted by anyone of any digital literacy. Some people like to say that the best tech is when you don't even know it's there. Because if you just focus solely on the tech force and not actually enabling for people to use them, your competitiveness is not going to stay for very long. And lastly, I think this is something that is increasingly important is, of course, the other angle on whether there are opportunities to convert research on new tech or deep tech into commercial products. And I think I'm seeing more research organizations actually setting up incubator-like efforts to support the conversion of research into commercial products. And this would be an area where a country can potentially differentiate itself from the other countries and be at the forefront and remain competitive. That's clearly something that is much needed, because sometimes your tech folks or your research folks may not have the business capabilities to scale something that they've kind of been researching and whatnot into a commercial product. So that's also key. But at the end of the day, I think whatever we choose to do in terms of having a more robust labor task force is back to the point about how diversity leads to greater innovation. And I think studies have shown indeed that a company that's more diverse actually gains like maybe 20% more profit than others. And I think this is true both in the private and public sectors as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Diversity helps innovation. And so if we can have more women and more diversity in the labor force, then we can close that gap, but also give them the skills that we need in the future, because as you say, technology is everywhere. And so increasingly we'll need to have those skills. Jung Sun, looking at Korea in particular, because as I said previously, South Korea is a very interesting country to look at when it comes to STEM. South Korea is obviously a tech leader, and it also outperforms very often the rest of the world in international assessments, such as PISA, in science and math. So the Korean population is very good at technology and STEM, supposedly. Yet, Korea has some of the lowest percentage of women in STEM. So why do you think that is? And what do you think can be done in Korea to increase the number of women in STEM?
I was muted. Yes, I agree that Korea has been doing remarkably well in technology advancement, as well as in math and science education. The enrollment of girls in science and engineering is not that bad, in fact, except for some engineering fields like mechanical engineering or civil engineering. But even in these fields, although the enrollment of girls are low, they are not they're, I think, doing better than many of the other countries. The problem is after graduation. So in other words, the problem with women in STEM issues in Korea is more of the employment and the work environment issues rather than bringing more girls into university level education and STEM education. Earlier, I spoke about the gender gap index. And if you look at the gender gap index of Korea, Korea shows very low values in the economic participation of women. And this gets even more serious when we are looking at the economic participation rate of highly educated women. However, since 2002, which is the year that we have enacted a law that is to support women in STEM, we are slowly improving, and we're slowly getting the numbers high, but not high enough. And this is revealed by the Korean Foundation for Women in Science, Engineering, and Technology. The sad fact is still that over the past 10 years, if we look at the figures, the size and proportion of female employment in STEM have shown a 17.3 increase, which may seem like a good figure, but still we're very low in terms of women in STEM workforce, because only among the researchers in STEM, only 10% are women. And most of them tend to be in the age group of the 20s and 30s, and this takes up about 67%. What is even more alarming is that more than half of the women stay less than 5 years in STEM-related jobs. And only about 20% of women tend to stay for more than 10 years. So we still have to find ways to mend the leak of the pipeline. Earlier, I agree very much with what Kylie has been saying about the diversion, making the workplace a diverse plus inclusive. So diversity and inclusion, I think, is a very critical factor that has to be employed in the workplace in Korea. And we also need what is called a women-friendly work environment in order to retain the talented women in STEM. it's not just a matter of equal opportunity setting. We need, again, to incorporate what is a more diverse and inclusive atmosphere. And looking at the gender barriers, which of course includes the gender stereotypes, like Liyana was saying, I think I would agree very much. But I think there's more than just the typical gender stereotyping issues. When we conducted a study among men and women, especially in the younger age, what we found very interesting is the way men and women perceive gender barriers differently. And here the emphasis is perception. So, and what is more alarming is that sometimes even the women themselves do not recognize the barriers that they are facing and tend to take fault for themselves for not adjusting to the workplace. So for this, what I recommend is continued research. I think its policy has to be based on hard facts and figures based on research that is focused on the women and STEM issues, so that we can recognize the problems more objectively and have the policies either amended or introduced.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I couldn't agree more with everything you said. Bringing it back to Australia now, Kylie, the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering aims to grow Australia's future STEM capability. So when you, in your research, what are the current skill gaps in Australia? And then how could Australia benefit from having more female in their STEM related field?
Thank you. So currently, well, I've already mentioned the gender statistics for engineering in Australia, but the skills gaps more broadly, we're looking at a growing and very rapid need in data analysis and data technology. We're looking at a growing and rapid need in artificial intelligence and machine learning, quantum computing, advanced manufacturing and agricultural technology. Now, some of those are on the verge of getting quite desperate and others are already there. It's been exacerbated by the pandemic and the inability of people to transfer workforces around the world, despite the fact that a lot of these jobs can be done remotely for security reasons. For example, with AI and machine learning, it's preferable to have people sitting in a room together. So it's been very difficult for Australia, which has traditionally had an enormous reliance on international students, and the workforce flow through from the graduates of international students in Australia have not able to access that potential workforce at the moment. That's quite problematic. The benefits are, well, I mean, Jung Sun and Liyana have both spoken a little bit already about the benefits of making sure that the workforce is gender equal. Firstly, obviously, we're not accessing a large proportion of our potential STEM workforce if we're not proactively including, drawing in, supporting and incentivising the promotion of women in STEM. But it gets to more, I suppose, societal and technical issues than that. And I'd like to take artificial intelligence as an example. More and more machine learning is running our systems, our social security, our health systems, traffic systems, education. All manner of systems are being taken over by AI, either now or in the near future. And we have a narrow and very rapidly closing window right now to ensure that the people who teach those systems to think have a range of different perspectives. Somebody with a disability is going to have a very different lens on what a social security system ought to look like, or what a city transportation system ought to look like, than somebody who doesn't have a disability. Somebody who has caring responsibilities and needs to get children safely to school or to medical help is going to have a very different idea about how those systems ought to be arranged and where those physical things ought to be located, compared with someone who hasn't been involved intimately in those activities. Somebody who comes from another minority group like LGBTIQ, or in Australia, a person of colour, they're going to have a very different experience of what it's like to walk into a room in any given situation, compared with somebody who comes from the majority. And for those reasons, I think it is absolutely crucial during this narrow window where we are teaching these systems to think, these systems that will be running our society, sometimes already are. If we are teaching them how to think, we need to teach them how to think inclusively and how to think with kindness. Because we know that any biases that are coded in at the beginning only exacerbate over time, and research has demonstrated that time and time again. We know that equally that people are not aware of their own biases. So the only real way to protect against that is not bias training or unconscious bias training. The only real way to protect against that is to ensure that you have a diverse group of people with diverse cultural understanding, perspectives, and life experiences sitting at the table building the product in the first place. And that's partly, well, that's not partly, that is why the Academy of Technology and Engineering, through our education and our career pathways programs, deliberately and proactively reach out first of all to people from minority groups and to girls. So we're targeting people from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. We're ensuring that we have more girls than boys doing our coding education course and our hands-on STEM education course. We're ensuring that we have a range of people of colour, people with disability, people with diverse gender and sexual identities involved in our work placement courses and professional development, and then support them and their potential employers with a D&I toolkit specifically curated for STEM employers to enable them to, once they get into that workplace, be welcomed and supported to thrive.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we've seen kind of where we stand in terms of women in STEM in the region. We've seen why it's so important to talk about it. Now I want to look at maybe a little bit more of the positive side and look at where we can go from now. So Jung Sun, and also just a reminder that if you have any questions, make sure to put it in the Q&A box. I'm not entirely sure that we'll have time to go over them, but we can try. So Jung Sun, Liyana had said that one of the challenges of women in tech is isolation and not having kind of a support system there to help you through these challenges. You are a member of the Association of Korean Women Scientists and Engineers, and you're obviously also the president of the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists. So according to you, what do you think is the benefit of small group support programs for women in STEM? And how can these networks improve women participation in STEM in the region?
The importance of networks and women have been emphasized by many scholars and by some government, and also this is quite well emphasized by UNESCO. In fact, there is a statement in UNESCO that you can find in their webpage which says that one of their priority is to strengthen women's networks in STEM. And these networks need not be formal networks. While I was serving as Director General of the Busan Ulsan Gyeongnam Regional Center for Supporting Women in Science and Technology a few years back, we initiated a program called Small Group Support, and this was in 2009. The purpose was to ensure visibility and empowerment of women in STEM in our particular region. And the reason why we started this project was because there is a gap between the employment status and the way and the status of women in STEM in regions compared to the capital, which is Seoul. So we assume that by providing networking opportunities for women, then there would be a chance for them to gain more, they would be more empowered and would have some benefit in terms of employment and also adjusting to their workplace. Now, what the small groups have provided these women were, the usual sharing of ideas, sharing of information, and most importantly, feeling secure, knowing that there are other women who are in similar situations and there are women who have similar thoughts. One example that I can introduce to you is the small group support that was provided to women in a small pharmaceutical company. The women, at that time, they did not have a women's lounge, for example, in their company. but no one was able to voice this need. But with the small group, they were able to do so, and management was convinced, and they ended up providing the women with the lounge that they needed. Now, this was an advantage not just for the women who were working in the company, but also for the company in the sense that they realized that they could retain the women scientists better by providing these I wouldn't call them benefits, but providing providing the needs of the women scientists and engineers in the company. There were also other collaborative efforts through the small group where they were able to have more publication in internationally peer journal, because sometimes women tend to be neglected, or they are isolated or segregated from the information source. So this has been quite well received by both the women and also for the management of the institutions. Another thing that I want to talk about is, now this is not the small group, but a bigger group of the KWSC, or the Association of Korean Women Scientists and Engineers, which is the first organization of women in STEM in Korea, established in 1993. When the organization was first started, most of the women who were working in the research park area in the Daejeon area were employed in what is called the contingent type, meaning that they did not have the job security that most of their male colleagues had. So about 230 women among the 400 total women got together. They formed this association. And with this association, their activities led to the enactment of the law to support women and scientists and engineers in 2002. And so now the situation of women in terms of the research area in Daejeon has improved immensely, although there's still a lot more to go. So this is an example of what networks can do. International networks, same thing. There are still many countries that do not have organizations exclusive for women in STEM. So what INWEST does is to provide these women with the know-how, for example, of what KWSC has done in Korea, so that they can form their own organization where they can bring their voices together and make sure that they are heard better, so that people or the government or the management will understand the needs of the women better, so that they can be better retained and they can have a more secure working environment.
Great, thank you. Yeah, very, very important to have that support group and people that you can relate to. Kylie, so I was telling you before we went live that Asia Society Australia is a member-based organization, and many of our members and many of the people on the call today are either from top ASX companies or from government bodies. So it's a great opportunity to talk to them directly. And I know that you do this in your daily work, but let's do this today as well. What do you think companies and policymakers could do to drive more diversity in tech and inspire young women to pursue careers in tech?
Thanks, Lena. Look, there are really three things that need to happen to improve the situation and gender equity in tech. And one is role modelling that we've spoken about already. The other is structural reform. And then the third is cultural reform. On role modelling, it's really actually not that hard. We tell the stories of women, not just now, but historically women who have made a significant difference in technology. Women like Margaret Hamilton, who was the world's first software engineer and coded the moon landing. Women like Ruby Payne-Scott, an Australian woman who invented radio astronomy and ended up having to leave the Commonwealth Scientific Industrial Research Organisation because she had a baby. So we need to tell the stories of women historically in this field. We also need to empower women currently to tell their own stories and provide platforms for them for those stories to be told and celebrated through programs like the Superstars of STEM. When we come to the structural piece, it's obviously a lot harder, and there are a couple of really terrific resources available that big organisations, and particularly big employers of STEM, can access. One is obviously the Diversity Council of Australia, and that has a lot of excellent research and tools and processes available to support employers to get better at being equitable and inclusive. The other is the SAGE program, Science in Australia Gender Equity Program, and SAGE is a bit like a qualification program, where as an organisation you're supported to do a really deep dive and a very honest internal look at yourself and your policies and practices and culture on gender equity, and then you're supported with tools to improve that and ways to measure your improvement and accountability around that. So you're asked to come back and talk about and report against how you are improving your practices and what's happening as a result. The third one, culture change, it's the really tricky one. Diversity Council of Australia actually does have some very practical resources for culture change. And I would probably add, because I can, to the list, I guess, a plug for our own program here at the Academy of Technology and Engineering. Our IMNES program, Industry Mentoring Network in STEM, connects very senior industry leaders from across the STEM ecosystem in Australia and internationally with PhD students who are studying STEM. And the idea is through a one-year structured mentoring program, those PhD students become future leaders in industry. They're connected with the right network. They are taught about the different culture and language compared with academia, and then whether they go into academia or into industry, and most of them do go into industry, they know how to collaborate between the two ecosystems, which is really important. We're also about to launch a new industry internship program, which would be the extension for the mentoring program, because almost all of our mentors have asked for an internship program, which is terrific news. So watch this space, and if anyone's interested in becoming involved in that, I'm very, very happy to receive your query. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I see we have a question from Eloise about the importance of mentors and mentorship. So I hope that Kylie's answer answered your question just now. So we obviously we talked about the importance of diversity, not only gender diversity, but diversity in all its different shapes and forms. Liyana, turning to you for, I mentioned this in my introduction, and so now we're here. Could you tell us a little bit more about the work that you do at the CODET project, and how can we leverage technology to empower minority women and minority communities?
Thanks, Lina. So firstly, about the CODET project. So the CODET project is a sort of ground-up initiative to enable more minority Muslim women to be successful with technology. So we run workshops, we have mentorship programs, we have hackathons, career talks, whatnot. Quite a range of activities. And I think so far in the work that we're doing in the CODET project, we realized that there are a few things that we need to do. Firstly, there's a strong need to claim back what success looks like. It might sound a bit cliched, but it's true. You need to claim back what success looks like and define it, and not let it be defined by those outside the community. Given that minority communities are much smaller, the number of visible role models in tech are far and few between. So women in such communities have to work a lot harder to find role models that look like them. So that's where we try to build a supportive community for women and claim back the narrative that women can be successful with tech. And also it's quite interesting that I've been reading up a little bit about gender stereotypes, and apparently it seems as though there was some research conducted using machine learning, and they reviewed books from 1980 to 2008, if I'm not wrong. And they found that most of the adjectives that actually describe women were about looks, about things like being beautiful and whatnot, and adjectives that describe men were about the characteristics, so it clearly shows, the emphasis, even as we grow up, the narrative that we get is women are beautiful, and we don't really think so much about the practical and the stuff like personality, strength. Interestingly, I was also reading about this thing called the Backdale Test, which in the media, it shows about how often are women featured prominently, or are they featured as talking about other men. And they found that a lot of movies actually show women talking about other men and not really talking about the women issues. So media plays a big role in how we define what success looks like for a minority group or any other group. for example. So for us in the GovTech project, we look at it from, apart from running workshops and all that, we do things like, for example, we have a initiative called Success Looks Like This, which is a photo exhibition that showcases women that have been successful with technology, and then to redefine what it looks like when you say success. Another thing that we've done is that we've released some stock photos into Shutterstock that show minority women in the workplace, using a laptop, using a computer. Because if you Google photos, you don't see much of that. And we need to sort of inject that into media. So it's really important, I think. Also, another thing that I've learned through the GovTech project is this importance of knowing your own intersectionality. All of us, we carry multiple identities. We're not just women. We are women. We have a certain gender preference and whatnot. When I say gender preference, I mean like your sexual identity and all that. You carry along with you a range of identity. So it's very complex when you talk about community development. It's not just a one size fits all. You have to really go deep into it. So for the GovTech project, I'm currently running a mentorship and funding program called the GovTech Cares. This is basically inspired by my stint as when I was an intern in a sort of a startup incubator, trying to get more venture capitalists and founders to come together to give advice and help build network connections. And that's exactly what the GovTech Cares project is about. We connect women, young girls in STEM-related courses with professionals in the industry so they can come together and sort of help them work through whatever career stuff they're working through, whatever school stuff that they're working through. Because I think it's really important to build a community that they can reach out to. For some of us, the community is a lot more accessible, given our maybe socioeconomic status and whatnot. It's a lot more accessible, but for some people, it's really, really hard. So I think it's important to be very, very familiar or get familiar with the nuances within the community and what are the impactful things that you can do to support the community.
Great, thank you. It really brings me a lot of joy to see all the amazing initiatives that you're all working on. I feel like I can be quite sad and angry when I talk about these issues, but there is some hope out there, and I actually want to end on a good note. And because this is a Disruptive Asia event, I want to ask all of you, how do you think that women will disrupt the tech sector in the near future? And also, what advice would you want to give to young girls who want to pursue careers in STEM at the moment? So you're welcome. You're all welcome to answer this question. But Liyana, I know that you were quite excited about this question, so maybe you want to start.
Yeah, I was. I thought it was an interesting question to ask about how women will disrupt technology. But when I was thinking about it, I realized that it doesn't have to be like a big bang kind of thing. It's actually quite simple. I think having more women in the tech sector will just mean that more useful tech products and services that help solve problems or make lives better will be developed based on the issues that these women face or the gaps in the market that we see. So I think the example I really like is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this app called Bumble, which is a dating app with a female CEO. And the interesting about the app is that it empowers a woman to choose when she wants to approach whoever she wants to talk to on the application. And that was clearly a gap in the market that nobody else saw. And you can see how Bumble is doing really well. They recently IPO'd. So I think women will provide more lived experiences that will result in new tech products to solve the gaps in the market today. And that's quite exciting. And as for advice for young women who want to enter the industry, I think when I first started out, I often was very worried that I did not know enough. I just felt like I was inadequate. But after being here for about 10 years, I realized that you don't have to know everything, clearly. You just really need to hone your craft. Whatever you're pursuing, just hone your craft, because nobody can take that skill away from you. You've got it, whether you're a man or woman, you hone your craft and you've got it. And along the way, you'll just pick up new things as you go along. And tech changes so fast, STEM changes so fast, you definitely pick up things. I think the second tip I would give is to seek out communities with like-minded people. There are many communities out there compared to many years ago. I mean, the GovTech project, Girls in Tech, She Loves Data, some of the things shared by our panelists today. So these communities can be your go-to for like tech tuition, career advice on how to navigate the industry as a woman. And I think with skills and a community behind you, I think that sets up a young lady to actually do quite well in whatever industry they choose in.
I would agree. Find your tribe and have a go are two really, really important pieces of advice, and certainly the ones that keep coming up for me when I'm speaking to successful women in tech. I'm really excited about the future of technology. The more women and girls we get involved, the better as far as I'm concerned. We know that teenage girls are the biggest innovators of language on the planet. So imagine what teenage girls could do when they turn their collective minds and creativity to STEM and to technology. And that integration of human first technology, such as what we've seen from Marita Cheng, for example, where she's transforming the way that disabled people can connect and interact with society and work, or Catherine Ball, who's bringing the arts and the world of drones together. So they're doing drone ballets over the river in Brisbane. There are so many exciting possibilities. I think the more people we have with the more creative ideas and perspectives, the better. It's going to be exciting.
I totally agree with Kylie and Liyana, and I see a very colorful environment in the tech sector, and I think this is how women will be disrupting the tech sector. You will see a colorful, meaning more ideas, more creative environment, and the liveliness that we feel right now here during our I think webcast will be felt even more strongly in the near future, and I'm really hoping for such a future to come. My advice to the young girls is, I mean, for the time being, would be to be part of a girls' network. I'm not saying that they should segregate themselves from men, but they really need the support at this point, and it can be very helpful in terms of mentoring, in terms of finding role models, and the additional networking among girls and women in STEM can provide the support and advice, and they can put together their voices so they can be heard more clearly.
Great. Thank you so much. I love this. I can see all of us just nodding. So it's great that we're all agreeing. And I think, it's 4 p.m. here in Sydney, so I should be tired, but I feel extra energized after this conversation. So I want to thank all three of you for this conversation. I think I speak for all of us at Asia Society when I say that this was a great conversation, and I really do wish that we would have more time to really get in the nitty-gritty of things. But that's all the time that we have for now. So in addition to the publications and the events that I mentioned, we're also doing Disruptive Asia video series, and we ask women and men from across the region about what shocks them in the gender space and what they hope to see. And our latest 2 videos are on AI in India and medical studies in Japan. So they're actually quite fitting for today's discussion. So make sure that you watch these videos. And also keep an eye out for chapter 2 and 3 of this year's edition of Disruptive Asia that is due to come out next year. Also a reminder to please donate to the Inspire initiative if you can, to help women find independence after experiencing family violence. And then lastly, please join us on Thursday, 9 December for our next public event on disrupted supply chains, where we'll discuss how business can navigate supply chain disruptions in an age of geoeconomic uncertainty. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again so much for today's conversation, and I hope that we can continue the conversation through emails or in the future. Thanks again, and bye for now.